Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Zoom on supply chain resiliency. It's an exciting time. You're going to get a lot of information from our panelist, Lisa Anderson. My name's Jaime Hurtado. I am the manager of the Riverside County International Business Office. We're here to assist business owners, corporate officers, investors, and entrepreneurs with the import-export assistance with the objective of creating new jobs and investment within the county. The International Business Office, known as IBO, serves as your link to developing in existing markets overseas, including our United States Export Assistance Centers, Foreign Agricultural Services, the United States Chambers of Commerce. We're also directly responsible for government-to-government relations as it pertains to economic development, trade, tourism, goodwill with the organizations here in the United States and abroad. We're strategically placed within business and community services to have direct access to vast resources, support, and assistance from our team here, and to dedicated professionals that work with us on a daily basis, like our friends, Lisa Anderson and Paul Smith. So welcome everyone to this excellent opportunity to learn more about our supply chain resiliency. I'd like to introduce right now, before I introduce Lisa Anderson, I'd like to pass over the, not the mic, but the video to my good friend, Paul Smith, who's with the Small Business Administration, a strong partner with IBO. And we're always happy to have him as a resource, as a friend, and as a collaborator. Paul?
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Jaime and team, for allowing me to be on this call today. It's a pleasure to be of service. First, I'd like to introduce myself, Paul Smith. I'm an Economic Development Specialist and District International Trade Officer. And I represent the SBA Orange County Inland Empire District Office. We're one of 68 offices nationwide, and we're a very robust agency. We have networks, funded networks throughout the country, which include the Small Business Development Centers, the Women Business Centers, SCORE, and the Veterans Centers. These networks also include unfunded partners like Riverside County, who has been a true champion for years of business, and it's a pleasure to be on this call today. The mission of SBA is to assist Americans start, grow, and expand their business. What the slide says is we help Americans start, grow, expand, and recover. Of late, you probably have heard of SBA because we've been heavily involved. It's something that must be said. It's a very high priority that we work diligently for diversity and inclusion, providing equity and services to all. And that's very, very important. Along with our mission, SBA has a strong commitment to trade development, both domestic and international. And to that end, we facilitate out of our office the export outreach team, which includes our funded resource partners and Riverside County and other partners as well. Today's program is a great representation of the types of deliverables that we want to bring to the business community. When you think about the pandemic and the impact of the changing world, supply chain resiliency and financial strategies, trade and global logistics, and demand and supply, amongst other topics, are just critical for American businesses to continue to grow. So that's what we do, and we do a lot. Our budget last year was almost $1 trillion, which mirrored that of the Department of Defense. And I think I've covered it. One thing I haven't spoken to is when we talk about access to capital, it's both for domestic and international. We actually have some international trade programs that are grants to reimburse you for some of your expenses. In government contracting, our office alone did approximately $1.2 billion in government contracting last year alone. The federal budget is over $500 billion, and 23% of that goes to small business. In international trade, we have loan programs, mentoring, and assistance to assist in that area. And technology and development, we're also heavily involved with universities, accelerators, and innovators and even provide grants with SBIR to assist in companies bring their technologies forward. So to that note, if you ever need any assistance, please feel free to call Riverside County or myself. There's my phone number and my email address. And Jaime and team, thank you very much for letting me be part of this program today. Take care.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for that. At this time, I'd like to present Lisa Anderson, introduce Lisa Anderson. A little bit about Lisa. Lisa Anderson is the founder and president of LMA Consulting Group Incorporated, a consulting firm that specializes in manufacturing strategy and end-to-end supply chain transformation that maximizes the customer experience and enables profitable, scalable, dramatic business growth. She has been named in the top 46 most influential supply chain by SAP, a top 40 B2B tech influencer by Arcady Group, and the top 50 ERP influencer by Washington Frank. She recently published Future-Proofing Manufacturing and Supply Chain Post-COVID-19, an ebook on successfully emerging and thriving post-COVID-19. Lisa?
Very good. All right. Well, so I'm going to share my screen so that we can follow along here. So, okay. So if you would like, Jaime, you can always ask questions as we go, or if folks put it into the chat or the Q&A box, that's great. If not, I'll just keep going. All right. So I thought I'd start with this is a picture of what supply chain management really means, because I know that there's probably a lot of different types of folks attending and with different levels of expertise on supply chain management. So this is like a pre-pandemic simple picture of what supply chain management used to be. So in essence, you have on the right-hand side your customer. So you may have many layers of customers, but you have your customer. Product goes through, typically speaking, through a distributor to get there. It was produced somewhere as the manufacturer. There could be many, but with this, like I said, this is a simplified view. And then the manufacturer is going to have a supplier that has to supply materials and components and ingredients, those kinds of things. And then certainly your supplier has suppliers as well. So that, like I said, this is an extremely simplified version of a supply chain. And even this has several layers to it. So this is like what the supply chain has traditionally looked like. Now, in the last 10, 20 years, we have gone global. So this is what the supply chain has looked like now pre-pandemic, and certainly still looks this way, which in essence means that we have there could be many layers of customers, many layers of suppliers, and the suppliers can be throughout the world. So for example, I have clients that produce in, like, let's say North Carolina, and they also purchase some of the items that they sell direct to customers from overseas. So let's say China. So they have manufacturing in both North Carolina and China. And actually they have more than that. They have manufacturing in Canada and some other countries. But that's their core, they're manufacturing for supplying the end customer. Then they have suppliers throughout the US and throughout the world to supply their manufacturing plant to keep going in just the one that's in North Carolina. They have other suppliers that supply Canada and so on. And each of those suppliers have many suppliers that supply them. So that's the network. And then in between all those people, you have boats, trains, planes, trucks, etc. So it's a very complex global network. And actually there's a Inland Empire company that who's been significant in the trade world as well, Paulson Manufacturing. And I know that they actually had some products that went back and forth to Europe and the US and other places before it was finalized. And that's not uncommon. So as you can imagine, because we have worldwide supply chains and customers worldwide, we have things were completely disrupted when we went into the pandemic. So, you know, as we're all very well aware, because we're consumers, you know, the grocery stores were empty in the beginning of the pandemic. And then we've had like spurts throughout where there's been issues with certain items here and there. And also another thing that's the other picture here is related to computer chips. We probably are all aware that there's a computer chip shortage, and that's, you know, produced throughout the world. But both sides of this equation, as two examples, are supplied from throughout the world, and they have complex supply chains. So in the computer chip side of things, it's still a mess. It's still a complete mess, and it's actually getting worse because of the Russia-Ukraine war and because of other global challenges. And computer chips are used in many products. So you would, you know, like I did interviews with the baking industry, and the baking industry was really held up because there's computer chips in ovens. There's also computer chips, obviously, in cars, and that's created quite the demand for, you know, it's increased the prices of cars dramatically, and it's delayed, you know, launches, etc. So that's just to give you a couple of examples, but they're in all sorts of products. And that's the idea here is that the supply chain is really, because it's global, because it's complex, and as I was showing here, we have, let's just say that one of our suppliers is on time. That's great. However, because we have such a complex network and we have to fly things, send them in boats, send them over the road, if any of these pieces of the supply chain, any links in the supply chain are not performing on schedule or are delayed, it causes a ripple effect through the entire supply chain. So we really are, we used to say this, but now it's been demonstrated. We're only as strong as our weakest link in the supply chain. And with as many links as every company has, that's quite problematic. So this is what happened. We had during the pandemic, we had an unprecedented volatility of demand. So as we probably are all very well aware of, in the beginning of the pandemic, all the stores were running out of toilet paper. And it was like, some of that was because there was panic buying going on. So we were all worried we wouldn't be able to go back to the store, or we wouldn't be able to get it. So we bought more than we normally do. Well, our supply chains throughout the world are, and most toilet paper is actually produced in the US, but our supply chains are not geared to run 4 times, 5 times as much as they had for the last 10, 20, 30 years. So that caused shortages. That seems kind of obvious. The other thing that happened with toilet paper is that we all stopped going into the office to work, basically. And so we're all suddenly, if we were working from home. And so we needed toilet paper for our houses, not for offices. So the supply chains are very different for retail, which is what we're doing when we go to the store or Costco or somewhere, versus commercial. So, you know, when we go to the store now, we have to have a pretty package of toilet paper because that's just the way we're accustomed to receiving it, and you know, with nice branding, etc. For offices, they don't need that because no one looks at it. They're interested in buying in bulk, and they're interested in just, you know, rolls of toilet paper that, you know, are not pretty, and they're produced. They might be produced on the same machines, but they very well may not be, because they may just, it depends on what that company is set up to do. So the supply chain, the packaging, the trekking, none of that was set up to change between commercial and retail. So I'm giving you that example because it seems like it's a relatively easy thing to resolve, but it really isn't. One, because there was many times the volume, and two, because like the whole other supply chain was going on. The same thing was happening with food, really, because there was plenty of food. The restaurants had all sorts of food they could not sell because no one was going to a restaurant. But the stores did not have any of that food. Again, it was not packaged for stores. It was packaged for restaurants. So the innovative restaurants were actually selling eggs, and innovative people, like I have a supply chain colleague who actually made a deal with a local restaurant and worked things out. So, but the idea here is that the supply chains were established and they got completely out of alignment. So basically the wrong items were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Another thing to like bring up here is that because I'm sure that, if nothing else, we're in the Inland Empire, so we know that we have lots of warehouses in the Inland Empire. So what was happening before the pandemic is that before the pandemic hit the US, it was in China. And so basically China had shut down for quite a while we were still buying all sorts of things. And so, but there's a 13-week lead time, or there was before the pandemic, to get something from China to a warehouse in the US and then out to consumers. So there was plenty of things on the boats coming over, being offloaded at the ports and being delivered to warehouses. And we were buying. However, they shut down. So there was still 13 weeks though, in process, if you will, or could be more, but that's basically the general time frame. And so we didn't necessarily notice the problem. And then we shut down, and then they were starting to run. But by the time we shut down, first of all, we had all of the wrong items, because after all, think about it from a season point of view. If we were getting all sorts of items for the spring season, like no one was going anywhere at that point in time. So we didn't need any of those items, but it was already on the water at the port or in a warehouse. So now we have all sorts of wrong items, basically, that consumers don't want. But we don't have the items that we would need for being in our houses. And now we've changed our process, and we started to think, well, I think I'll start working in the lawn and gardening and doing other activities. Well, those demands spiked like crazy, but none of those things were on the water, because they were just, they were not the things that were being expected to be used. So basically the reason I gave you that example is that you can see that it's not so easy to like turn off a switch, because you have so many, and this is a simple supply chain I was describing, because that's just 13 weeks on the water from China, let's say. However, like I said, even within China, they oftentimes go through multiple manufacturers before they get to a final product that comes over here. Or like the example I gave of a company in the Inland Empire, they might actually fly products back and forth to different places or truck them back and forth. Even in Southern California, especially like in the aerospace industry, we move products among manufacturers many times, because we might like produce a component and then we'll send it somewhere to be painted, because we can't paint it everywhere because we have lots of environmental laws. So there's certain people set up to paint. We may have somebody do, deburring or something. They'll do different pieces of the manufacturing process, and then they will bring it back. So if anyone in your chain or any truck is not available, you have an issue. So that's how we got into this mess, basically. So all the items, generally speaking, were in the wrong place at the wrong time. So was the equipment, though, because if you think about it this way, like China didn't have anything to send to us while they were locked down. So everything was in the US. Like everything, meaning like they get sent over on container ships, and then we offload them at warehouses, and then we have empty containers. So all the equipment wasn't flowing back to China, because it was flowing back to China, but China wasn't doing anything with it. So it started to stockpile there. And then when we started opening up later, like now we have a stockpile at our ports, which we still have. So anyway, that's how we got into this trouble. And then it was further exacerbated by other issues going on because we have a global supply chain. So there was the ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal. I'm sure everyone's heard about it. It was about a year ago, and it created an issue for a few weeks where boats could not get around it, basically, or container ships could not get around it. So what did they do? Well, it's like a traffic jam. I mean, if you can't get anywhere else, you have to wait. On the other hand, if you know the traffic jam is there and you haven't started going, you might take a different route. The route is going to be longer. Or you might take a different mode of transportation. Instead of taking a container ship, you might fly something. Or you might, instead of going through that route, you might take a completely different route and send it to a different location altogether. So basically things changed because of that. And then we had storms in Texas where things, it was basically items froze, like pipes froze. And then there was like bigger demand because now we had all sorts of people who had to fix things in their house. So there was more demand for products. And at the same time, any trucks that were in Texas, any manufacturing plants, they were delayed in producing. So there you had both ends of the equation of additional volatility. So, and then there was labor shortages, right? We're all experiencing that. If you haven't experienced a labor shortage, there's probably something strange going on, because there was what's been known as the Great Resignation, where everyone is retiring or changing jobs, changing careers, just not going back to work. Maybe you decided to stay home with the kids. So there's different things going on. And basically, for every one of my clients, they do not have enough people to run the lines in manufacturing. They just don't. And now they're prioritizing who to run for, which customers should they run for, because they just don't have enough people. So it's labor shortages are extreme, and it's causing more disruptions. And then there's also the Russia-Ukraine war, because if we didn't have enough problems, we may as well have one more. So the Russia and Ukraine war is problematic for many reasons, but from the supply chain point of view, Russia and or Ukraine, if whatever they supply to the world is an issue, because it's not happening. So obviously oil and gas prices are a problem, although actually, strangely enough, Russia is still supplying oil to Europe, and that's like this. There's a whole controversy about that. But basically, they're not supplying as much, and the price of gas has obviously gone up. Oil and gas has gone up. The other thing, and oil and gas is not just going to the gas station. I used to be the vice president of operations for a adult incontinence products. So like adult diapers, hospital underpads, those types of things. And our product cost was heavily dependent on the price of oil and gas, because it went into plastic. So you would be surprised the number of products that oil and gas will affect. So that's one thing, but that's not the only thing, because Russia and Ukraine actually produce several commodities and metals that are very critical to different items. So like I have a client that uses nickel, and so they had to, like, the price of nickel has been skyrocketing because of this Russia-Ukraine war. So they're trying to secure supply, and they're trying to get, it before the price goes up even higher. However, there's also, this is a really bad thing, but there's commodities that are used in, again, the production of like computer chips and electronics industry related components. And so that's highly problematic, because we already have enough problems, as I was already describing, in that arena. And then, of course, to make matters worse, it also relates to our other picture, because the Ukraine and Russia produce a lot of the world's food supply. So wheat, as an example, fertilizer, which relates to everything. Now, we produce a lot in the US, so we're in better shape, generally speaking, although the prices are going up. But we're going to have to figure out, like, who's going to supply the rest of the world with food. We can't just like snap our fingers and suddenly have like double the amount of fields planted in the US. That doesn't work that way. So, you know, again, what do we do about these supply chain challenges? So that was further exasperated. I figured it was a good idea to make sure that we at least explained how that looks. And then there's in essence, now we're left in the situation of where we've created widespread shortages, extended lead times, and soaring prices. So as you probably have all heard, there's lots of issues at the ports, so I may as well address that as well. So there is still a backlog of container ships at the port. Because China has been shut down now for several weeks, which is quite problematic because it's going to, you know, if you think about it, how did we start this whole problem with the pandemic? China shut down at the beginning of the pandemic, and then it created this wave of problems. Well, that's what's happening again. Now, there's more going on than like thinking that, you know, does not appear like it's like some new pandemic that's going to cause the same kind of problems as the last one, but the same supply chain issues are going to be created if we have China shut down for 3-4 weeks. You know, it's going to create this wave of problems throughout our supply chain again. But nevertheless, we are making some progress because we don't have nearly the ships coming in from China at our ports. However, we still have problems at our ports. Now, we may not have them all sitting right off the coast because that created pollution problems and other problems. But what we did is we said, this is when you can get a dock appointment. So drive slower, basically. You know, so they're basically the container ships, like however many, you know, knots per hour, or however, you know, they measure that, however fast they were going. So like they slowed down and they would go like, I don't know, like 1/8 of the speed. So they would just drive slower, basically. So there's generally speaking, before China shut down, and then therefore there's not as many coming, they were just driving slower. There was just as many out there. It's just where they weren't sitting right outside of Southern California. So basically there was a bunch of container ships there. We did try to increase the times our ports offloaded because they were not operating 24/7. I mean, they were, but they weren't. You know, it's all dependent on, are all of the terminals offloading? And then if you offload, do you have somebody to pick the load up? And are they going to be picking up at the right place? So it's kind of like if you're waiting in line at the airport. First of all, you know, there's many terminals. There could be many terminals at a like LAX. There's going to be many terminals. So the idea is the same with the drivers. So first of all, there's a long line to get into the airport, period. Very long line. Then there's drivers waiting to take people home. Same thing that happens at an airport. They have to wait in a very, very long line. However, if they are waiting in the wrong terminal, which is very likely to have happened, then that's not good, obviously, because you'll have to figure out how to get to the right terminal. And by then, your hours have been used up for the day because truck drivers can only drive so long. They don't make any money waiting. And that's highly problematic. So that's basically what was happening. And then eventually you would pick up a load, or pick up a person if you're at the airport and leave. But that's, you know, there was a big backlog with trying to get that coordinated. And then just, do we have enough people picking up at the airport? Do we have enough drivers picking up at the ports? That's a whole nother question. And then if we do pick up at the ports, where are we going to drive to? That's the next question. Because as I was saying, we had all sorts of products in our warehouses that were the wrong products, right? We might eventually need them, but they weren't needed now. So like all of the warehouses throughout the Inland Empire are completely full. Where will we go? And then once we get to, let's say, a warehouse, we can get it offloaded eventually. Then we have an empty container. So where does that container need to go? It needs to go back to the port so it can go back to China, as an example. Well, no one was prioritizing empty containers. We were trying to get containers out. So there were stockpiles everywhere of empty containers. And then there was arguments about these empty containers, like who is going to pay for them to be stored somewhere? Where were we going to store them, and who is willing to take them? Does China want them back? No, they don't care. They'll just make new ones. So what are we going to do with all this stuff? That's like the big problem. So anyway, that's like in essence what was going on with all these areas. Now, as I said, China's been shut down for a while. So it's starting to make progress on this end, but we have another tsunami coming because eventually China is going to start back up, and then they will, we're going to have the same issue going on. So anyway, that's in essence where we are. We by no means are out of the world of supply chain disruptions. If anything, it's just getting worse because we have the Russia-Ukraine war. Strangely enough, that affects like the whole world because of the slide I was showing you before. And for example, Russia and Ukraine Ukraine supplies China with a lot of food. So what does that mean? So I don't know what that means. That means we have different issues going on here. So basically the whole supply chain has been disrupted. Now I think I'll pause for a second, see if anybody has any questions, then we'll talk about what do we do about this to create supply chain resiliency. So Jaime, do you have any questions so far?
Lisa, that was good stuff. I'll tell you, very insightful.
Well, thank you.
If anyone has any questions, please post on the group, on the Q&A chat, on the chat, please.
Very good. And I think Jaime, we have till we have another like hour anyway, right? Is that right?
Yes.
So I won't necessarily like talk just to talk, but I have other slides of how we can move forward from here, and I'm happy to answer questions as well along the way. But very
Lisa,
good.
this is an academy session to a certain degree. It has some academia
Okay.
overtones. So I would encourage you to actually just share that additional information, of course.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, very good. I will do that. All right, so that's so now we go to how do we create supply chain resiliency? Oh, and I see that we may have a question here. Oh, just thank you. You're welcome. That's great. So we have, how do we create supply chain resiliency? So we'll talk about these three topics, and then we're going to come back and talk about them in more detail. But the first is supply chain readiness. So in essence, we're going to talk about how to personalize and configure items. So this is like we could, like, for example, when we're buying a car, we don't all buy the exact same color, the exact same everything in the car. We want it configured to our purposes. So we basically want a car that is red, or we want leather seats, we want different things in our car. So that's what the idea of personalizing or configuring. It could be more than a car. I mean, obviously it could be any product. Like we buy a new window for our house, because obviously the real estate market is going like gangbusters. People are buying new houses and they're upgrading houses like no tomorrow. So every window, every door has like countless possibilities. Different materials you could use, different colors you could use, different sizes it could be. So there's countless like ways to personalize and configure things. So that's one is how do we do all that in a simpler way? So we'll talk about that and what's important about it. And so reshoring and nearshoring. So what that means is, instead of like beating our head against the wall continually with this whole idea of everything is produced in China and we'll just bring it over and then we'll use it here. Well, we got into this situation and we'll talk more about reshoring coming up, but just as a brief introduction, we got into this with China many, many years ago when labor rates were much lower in China than they are today, because they've been increasing significantly. You know, that was really the deal. We were thinking about cost, we were thinking about labor, and then we ended up investing, you know, like in China. So like we would, bigger global companies might build a facility and they invested at every company, you know, there had to be some investment that they paid China for, maybe, that like made a mold to, or made a piece of equipment in essence that helped them make products to support the customer. And they invested in plant and equipment, basically. So although some of those companies certainly would be owned in China, but it was proprietary products that we were buying. So we had to invest the money. So that's the problem, because we've been, you know, we outsourced because of labor costs, we invested the money, and we invested a lot of money up front. And so now labor costs have gone up in China, stayed about, you know, they're going up here now, but they've stayed relatively consistent in comparison. So in China, they've gone up at a much, much higher rate. But more importantly, we're also automating and finding ways to use robots and equipment to produce instead of having people produce. So the percentage of labor that's used in each product is smaller. So, you know, if labor is 5% of your product costs, like who cares if it's a little bit more expensive compared to the price of, let's say, oil and gas, because like perhaps that goes into the plastic you use, and that's like a far bigger cost. So like when I was the vice president of operations at a company that produced adult diapers, it was true that 70% of our cost, total cost for a product, was in materials, not in labor. And then the second biggest component was transportation. Again, kind of dependent on oil and gas and dependent on distances. And then after that, we had overhead and labor. So in that case, we never outsourced to China in the first place, because why would we do that? Because our costs were dependent more on the price of materials. Now, lots of people, though, you know, that wasn't their situation. So they outsourced when labor was the bigger component. But is it still that way? The answer is, generally speaking, no. However, the reason we weren't moving back, and that's in quotes because we'll talk more about that, but the reason we weren't moving back is because we invested millions of dollars in all this plant and equipment I was talking about, and we cannot get that investment back. It's not like they're going to send it to us. I mean, it doesn't work that way in China. So, you know, we were hesitant because we were like, well, you know, we got rid of our supply chain. We don't have a plant, you know, like we have problems now, and we don't have the capabilities to do it. So we were reluctant to do it. And so, you know, when we started putting tariffs on items prior to the pandemic, it started to become more of like, well, maybe we should think about it, because after all, we're starting to spend more money now getting this on an ongoing basis. And after all, what we already spent is a sunk cost. It doesn't matter anymore. It's spent. There's nothing we can do to get it back. And our costs are continuing to rise. So maybe we should start looking at it. So companies were already starting to look at moving manufacturing closer to home or closer to customers is really the deal. And so during the pandemic, now what we've realized is that, well, this is a problem to be dependent on so many different links in the supply chain, and on companies that may shut down on a whim. We don't have any control over them. Our government has no control over them. And not only that, but they will prioritize who they want to prioritize, which is going to be, of course, people that are in China as number one, and people who are maybe the big guys. So the big guys are kind of fine, you know, like the Targets of the world, the, you know, Walmarts of the world, the Apples of the world, you know, like they get prioritized because they're the big guys that, you know, volume is king. So they'll maybe get prioritized, but everyone else is in deep, deep trouble. So, that's one thing we realized. Another thing we realized, which is getting highlighted like no tomorrow right now, is that there is a lot of risk because there's there's always been the risk of IP theft and other bad things happening when we're dealing with a country that is not is communist. So but now it's a whole different matter because there's world conflicts, and we've realized that we need to be more in control of those items that are at least critical to our ability to carry on. So for example, pharmaceuticals, we can't survive. Some people cannot survive without certain medications. So what are we going to do about that? So anyway, so now bringing production closer to home and more within our control has become a big topic. So we will talk a bit more about that coming up. And let's see, I do have a question here, so I'll stop and answer it. So flexible manufacturing using automated systems that can easily and quickly adapt would allow flexible customization for on-demand orders. Yep, I mean, absolutely true. And we're going to talk more about that when we get to the personalize and configure conversation, because there is definitely technologies and processes that you can use that will help you better succeed in that environment, which is definitely the wave of the future, because we all don't want to buy just the Model T car like it was in the old days. Like, we're just not going to go back to that day. So we better do something. And then the third area here is we'll talk more about it, but it's because I said with the core cause of all these issues is demand and supply being out of alignment. So how do we get them back into alignment? That's the question. Now, we're not going to get it back into alignment at a global scale because there's just no one can coordinate with all of the companies in the entire world. I mean, I don't know who could do that successfully, but we can take control over our situation, our company's supply chain. And so we'll show you, I'll talk more about that in detail. So that's supply chain readiness. And then on the talent side, as we've been talking here, there's the great resignation and great reshuffling happening. So, and I mean by that is the great resignation is pretty apparent. Like, lots of people have decided, well, you know what? I was close enough to retirement. I'm done. I don't want to go back. I don't want to, I just don't have, I'm going to travel. And people have reevaluated their lives during the pandemic. And they said, you know what? I don't know what I was doing, focusing all my efforts on work before. I don't know why I was doing that. I was just doing it, and I'm not doing it anymore. And so they're also doing that with a reshuffle. So meaning, like, they've decided, you know what, life, hey, life is shorter than I realized. I might just want to try a different career. I want to live somewhere else. Lots of people are moving out of California right now because they're thinking, I want a higher quality of life. So, they're moving somewhere, moving to a different geography, moving careers. They're saying, you know what, I think we can do it with one salary instead of two, because I'd rather have, we don't have all the, the kids are still not everything is back in place for what used to happen in terms of our schools and childcare and those kinds of things. So they're saying, you know what, yeah, or there's too much risk. So you know what, it's fine. I'm just going to stay home, and maybe I'll work a part-time job if I can. And, and my husband or wife is going to be the one who makes the money. So whatever families have made different choices. And so there's a completely different picture going on here. And there's two different problems. One is having enough talent. But the second problem is having enough of the right kinds of talent, because of course, like everyone that's retiring of retirement age, generally speaking, has a lot of experience, because of course they're older One would think they most likely, on average, have more experience. So, they've got a lot of knowledge in their head. Not all of that knowledge has been like transferred to people within the company or transferred into a process or into a computer, so it can be repeated. So the problem is, if you have somebody really experienced that retires, oftentimes you need 2, 3, 4 people to replace them, which sounds ridiculous, but it's what clients are experiencing. Now, do they really replace them with all those people? No, not really. But that ends up causing more disruptions because, of course, they don't know all these things that this person that retired knew, and there wasn't a good transition process. So they have to learn it the hard way. So anyway, that's one issue. And then the other issue is that as we continue to automate and digitize, we need higher skills. So we don't need as many people, obviously, that are being taken over by the jobs that are automated. So we don't need people who just pack a box, let's say. But we do need people who know how to run the equipment that packs the box, and we can't find enough of those kinds of people. So that means you need to retrain or continually increase skills. So then, we're back to people who are retiring because they say, well, I'm done. I don't really want to learn anything new. They might be saying that. Or people are, we have to figure out a way to make our education system work with bringing them new skills. So like in the Inland Empire, there was a study by the Brookings Institute many years ago, because I'm a board member of the Inland Empire Economic Partnership. And so we've been talking about it from a supply chain point of view, that we were going to have a big problem in the Inland Empire because as opposed to the rest of California, we're heavily dependent on distribution and manufacturing, but to a lesser degree. So definitely distribution. And of course, transportation, because, all the items that come into the ports go through the Inland Empire on their way to the rest of the country. And we bring in 40% of what the country needs. So obviously they drive through, but the bigger thing is that they, generally speaking, stop at distribution centers. That's why you see all the big distribution centers for Amazon and other people. So the people who work in a distribution center, those jobs are not, generally speaking, there's a lot more automation that could be done than is done today. So even before the pandemic, the Brookings report said we have to do something to step up our skills and retrain and provide skills to our main workforce so that they can grow with the times, right? And we can have, there's going to be more jobs than before, because everybody was worried, like the ports, they're really worried about this automation, and they were like putting things into the union contracts, and there's like all this chaos about this topic, which is highly problematic because as a whole nother issue, if we insist on not automating because we don't want people to not have those jobs, what do people do? What do companies do? They go to different ports. Like I said, you find an alternate route. So it does not solve the problem. But anyway, there's a lot of controversy, certainly, on these topics. But in the Inland Empire, the same, the issue is that we have lots of people working in our distribution centers. And we were working on automating and, lots of, robots, drones, all these types of things. So either way, we were going to have a problem in the next 5 years or so. However, during the pandemic, that accelerated this greatly. So now we have a whole new problem because we're already at the point where everyone, has, there's a whole lot, sorts of other things that happen too, like e-commerce increased. What does that mean? That's the products that we ship directly to our house instead of to a DC. Well, that's who wouldn't want things shipped to their house? However, it's a very different equation because how do we get it from the DC, the distribution center, to thousands and thousands and thousands of houses instead of, one truck that takes it to that general area and then that's that, right? It's a very different equation. So anyway, that's a whole nother story. But basically in our DCs, we were already realizing we needed to automate, and now it's been accelerated greatly. So there's there's definitely an increased need for skills and providing, you know, ways for people to get new skills as well so that they can meet the new demands. Things have changed at a really accelerated pace and we have to keep up. If we don't keep up, like I said, companies and consumers don't care about our issues. Like, you know, as a consumer, I guess I don't care either, because if I go to the store, I go to the, you know, wherever I'm going, I say, well, if they don't have what I need, I'm going somewhere else. Or if like the route that I need to, if the company I would prefer to buy from doesn't have it, I go to a different company. If the route I have to follow to get to a client is blocked, I don't just go home. I find a new way to get there. So, you know, that's the thing that I think is missed, is all of that is happening because consumers just like don't care about the problems, like, you know, any of these other issues. They're going to find another answer. And companies have to continue to serve their customers and make a profit, or they'll just go out of business, which some are choosing to do. So like, that's another problem, because if we have companies going out of business, it means that the supply chain changed again, because someone is serving those customers, someone else is serving those customers. Where is that person located? Where that company located? Who are their suppliers? And like, you get into this whole other arena, because the consumer really does not care where your facilities are located at all. They just want what they want when they want it. So that's the deal with talent. So we need to be thinking about skills, and we need to be rethinking our talent strategy. So we'll talk about that on the next slide. And then on digitization, or on the next few slides, under digitization and data, as I was saying, we have to digitize and we have to automate in order to be successful. We also, what an ERP system is basically a system that you use to take orders, figure out what to produce, what to purchase. You ship orders to customers. You might accept returns, and you invoice customers. That's what you do with an ERP system. So we need, it used to be that you could use an old ERP system and it's relatively fine. It's no longer fine, because one of the things that, you know, in my consulting practice, we focus on manufacturing as like the core group of clients, and distributors is a secondary. And really, with those folks, we're looking at how do we manage through these supply. So how do we have the right things in the right place at the right time and at the right profit level, which is the tricky part. So in order to do that successfully, you have to use an ERP system to handle these transactions. You can't just do it manually. And like I said, what we've discovered now is that with the added complexity of the pandemic and the like, in order to figure out what prices you need to set, because that's a whole other topic here, keeping up with the increasing costs, you have to set prices and you have to know what your costs are. So you have to have a more modern ERP system to keep up with these changing conditions in a successful way. So that's going to be important, and we'll talk about that more. And there's a lot of other things, you know, that you could be doing here on the digitization realm. So we'll talk about that. And let's see if there's another question or maybe a comment, which would be good too. So, okay, let's see. We have Nita saying tailored education and skills training is needed to custom match with more focused employer industry needs. Yes, I completely agree. We and I could talk about that too, because I'm also the president of the Association for Supply Chain Management for this inland Southern California area. And we offer some training and education, the basics of how you do a lot of these pieces I've been talking about. But it has to be like, people have to know about it. And this is just one of many, many different types of training and training opportunities and mentoring. How do you, there's all sorts of things we need to work about. So I completely agree with that statement. And then let's see, this can also allow faster training to worker transitions, because employers want streamlined training to produce their new employees and upskilled workers. You're absolutely right, because no company wants to spend time. I mean, they have no time. Customers want product and services yesterday. They don't want to wait till someone's trained. Like, they could care less what you do to get someone trained. They just want what they want when they want it. So we have to figure out a way to get ahead of all of this. And so you're absolutely right. We have to work on how we do all of these activities, and with fewer people, because like even in the realm of like trade associations, governmental agencies that support these types of arenas, there has been an incredible turnover of people. So it's quite ridiculous. We have to, to some degree, we have to stop the madness and figure out where we prioritize, because this is just not doable in the current state. So so now I thought I'd back up here and just say, like, go through a few surveys that we put together here. So Thomas survey is really quite famous from a manufacturing and purchase supplies point of view. And they basically did a survey that said 83% of manufacturers are likely or very likely to reshore. That is a huge number versus 54% in 2020. I mean, that's like just huge numbers. And even in 2020, it was much higher than it was if we would have looked at 2019. What does that mean? It means that folks are looking at, it depends on their situation. I mean, do they produce anything? Like, let's just say they're in the US. Now, the other thing you need to know is, where are their customers? Because if the company is based in the US and the customers are in Europe, do we want to produce in the US? Probably not, because you want to be producing, if you think about it, you want quick responsiveness for supply chain resiliency. So how do you do that? One way is to produce close to where your customers are. So the reason that we say we want to bring things home is, generally speaking, there's a lot of customers in the US. And actually, there's a lot of customers in California. So that's why you see that we still have manufacturing in California, but the areas surrounding California are popping up, because it depends. Again, companies aren't going to produce where it's cost prohibitive and they can't make money. So they're going to go somewhere where they can make money, and then they'll truck it to California. So that's just what happens. So, but they're looking at, where are my customers? So 83% of manufacturers are likely to go closer to their customer, which means they're going to reshore and go like to the US, to Mexico, or Latin America. So that's a big number. And so I'll tell you more about that, because I have a client that's actually reshoring I could mention. Although you won't hear much about it in the news, because who in their right mind is going to tell their supply chain that they're reshoring so that they can be deprioritized? Like, who's going to do that? It's going to put them out of business. It makes no sense whatsoever. So that's the problem. And then the Industry Week Technology Survey said that 72% say that the pandemic increases urgency for ongoing digital transformation. I would think that number has gone up even higher for sure. So basically what that means is, we all need to be upgrading our ERP systems, utilizing additional technology, automating functions on our factory. Generally speaking, manufacturers have automated faster than distributors for sure. So because it's more complex in manufacturing. That's why I deal more with manufacturers than distributors. As complex as the supply chain is, as I showed you, in the manufacturing world, it's even more complex, because you aren't just purchasing and then shipping. You are purchasing, producing, and then you have multiple lines and different types of equipment and people, different skills needed, and all these different complications for manufacturing. And then you ship. And you may actually produce, ship to another manufacturer, receive it back, produce again. And this is very common. And you may even do that 2 or 3 times and then ship. So manufacturers are just more complex, which is, however, taking control of that obviously is something that's being done according to the Thomas survey. So nevertheless, you have to digitize what's going on, so they have like a hope of being able to keep track of all this and end up better than we are today with all the supply chain disruptions. That's the point. And then according to a Deloitte and MAPI ecosystem study, and this was in 2020, but I think it's, if nothing is but getting higher still. And that's saying that 80% of manufacturers say talent ecosystems are critical to competitiveness. So that was even before the Great Resignation. So as you can imagine, I think all these numbers are truly 100%. They are for my clients. But, we'll show you surveys regardless so that you can see. And then according to Interos, I thought this is a really interesting number, and I hope they do publish the latest numbers. I think will come out in July or something for the year, ending then. But 94% have experienced less revenue, meaning that they don't have the sales that they would have had otherwise because of the supply chain disruptions. That is a huge number. It's crazy. So the question is how much, like I have clients ranging from small family-owned businesses to private equity-backed companies that generally are medium-sized to global companies. And with multiple manufacturing locations, certainly multiple distribution points, if you will. And they've all experienced some sort of a negative impact to revenue. But the question is how much and how long? Because the ones that are smarter and more resilient, that's the topic today, are going to, they've all experienced it. So even the best, really some really good clients that are really on top of things and they're looking to improve even further, which is why they brought us on board. They are experiencing negative impacts to revenue. However, the time is shortened. So like instead of like just losing the customer altogether, they're experiencing delays in revenue. Or maybe they've consciously cut back on certain customers that were less profitable or unprofitable. And so they did that knowing that they couldn't supply every customer. And that's, of course, the smarter customers, clients of mine, which is, I would tell you is across all companies is like, generally speaking, I'm talking about the top 5%. They're going to continue to get better and better. And then some of the other ones are looking to catch up. And the rest that aren't doing anything are going to, go by the wayside. But we could talk about that coming up. So now we'll go to some of the particular topics we already started talking about. And so this is about customer personalization and configuration. As I was talking about B2B and B2C, so these might be like strange terms. It depends on what kind of a company you're in. But this business consumer, which is basically shipping direct, it's us ordering things on Amazon or directly from Walmart and they deliver it to the house. That's B2C. B2B is business to business. So that's, going from one business to another business, which even the B2B business has changed so that they're looking for more of a B2C like experience, meaning that they don't want to just ship in pallet quantities anymore. Now they want to they want one piece out of one package shipped at a time, right? That's a B2C. So, even B2B is turning more into a B2C kind of environment. But you want to know, in this case, you want to know your customers. So like, let me see here. Let's see if I have like another. Oh, this is a long one. So, okay. Said, because we do not have sufficient tailored training, employers keep rating each other's current employees. That is completely true. This is not sustainable. And from an educator's viewpoint, headhunters come hire entire way the classrooms of our students. Yep, that's true. By offering high wages. That's unfortunately all this is true. It's led to course retentions and cancellations. Yep. It's a huge problem. The industry is killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. That is true too. So there's a ton of problems, and I would tell you that clients. Actually, I'm working with a large. They're a global company, and they have they produce equipment that's needed, or piping and other supplies that relates to heating and HVAC equipment, as well as some other insulation kind of products. And their demand has gone up because everyone's like buying houses, upgrading houses, Texas storms, all those kinds of things. So their demand's gone up, and they just can't find enough people who want to work in the factory. So it's kind of, they've been working on it for a year longer. And I mean, they find some people, and they're actually a good company to work for, but it's been just really challenging for them. So they really are just saying, okay, we're going to start prioritizing customers, and the ones that are least profitable are going to be delayed, or we'll give them someone else because that's the best we can do. So that, I mean, that's just that's happening across the board. So you're absolutely right. And it's because they can't find people. And actually in a client that I'm working with, like I've been working with them for about a year, and it was really going in there to help them upgrade their supply chain so they could be more resilient, exactly what we're talking about. But in the meantime, they have lost 4 different people that are key leaders in the supply chain or planning. Planning means, how do I have the right items produced on the lines so that I can transfer these items to distribution centers throughout the US and Canada at the right time to supply it to the customers, right? So they lost 4 different people. So in the meantime, we end up like helping support them through these transitions. And like some of them are like literally the person walked out, as I was saying, with the knowledge in their head. They did not have it automated, even though they have a multi-million-dollar system. Like they use SAP in this case. And that SAP and Oracle are 2 of the, I wouldn't say best, but they're like the most robust systems. So like if you have a larger company that's global, you may use them. And for a small and mid-sized company, you definitely would be overkill. So, but my point is, it certainly has functionality in the system, so they could be using it. But like literally speaking, we're having to recreate things from scratch because it was being done on pieces of paper and Excel and people's heads, and it's like it's just incredible. And so we're having to help them, like before we can upgrade a supply chain network, we have to help them figure out how we can help them, fill these gaps and train people and all sorts of things. So it's no easy proposition, and it's certainly not an inexpensive proposition for them. However, they are better than some of their competitors who lose these people and they weren't upgrading their supply chain and didn't have resources that they could rely upon, because in those cases they just didn't do it. They couldn't do it. So they just, this company would take their volume. So it's a very tricky period of time we're living in right now. From that point of view. So to your point, as far as customer personalization and configuration, this goes back to the, first of all, know your customers' customers. I was working with a food bar manufacturer that's in the Inland Empire, and they would supply, it really matters who the customer is, because if it was their direct customer was really like the person who sends it off to the next layer that you would have heard of. So their next customer in line, like knowing what their volume is, was pretty useless, really. Didn't help us. Because during the pandemic, we had to find out what their customer's customer was doing. So their customer's customer was Costco, let's say. They did have Costco as a customer. Well, Costco was open. People were buying food bars, so that volume was pretty good. Their customer's customer is also doctor's offices. Well, that really stunk, because even though there was a lot of problems where people were sick, no one was going to the doctor's office. So if we were thinking that, if we only asked the customer, they would be mixing up Costco and the doctor's office, and that would be no good. And then they also had their customers would be Starbucks. Well, Starbucks was really not so good because a lot of them shut down. And then even when they opened up, it was drive-through only for a very long period of time. So what do you buy through the drive-through? Well, you don't buy things that are at the cash register at drive-through. I mean, you just don't see them. So that wasn't good. That wasn't great volume. So you really had to know who your customer's customer were and are, so that you can better understand their demand and also what they need. Like it makes total sense if you think about it. Like, why would Starbucks the sales goes down? Like, let's not fret over it. It's pretty obvious. It's not like because people stopped like liking this particular item. It's because of the situation. But that happens everywhere. It doesn't have to be a pandemic. You need to understand who it is that you're serving and who your customers are, or could be customer. So you need to figure out what exactly is going on. And from that point of view, you know, like a configure to order product, like a car is like obviously a big purchase. So that's, these days you can actually use software on a computer and say, oh, I'd like leather seats. I want this, I want that. Well, that's got to go into the whole supply chain. And then all those items and, you know, materials and components have to be ordered, and it all has to come together. So on the manufacturing line, you can, you know, produce it to order basically. But there's a lot of like I work with a equipment manufacturer that supplies machines and equipment to food processing companies. So like feeders that you might use where it's kind of like a large mixing bowl in manufacturing. But basically and every single machine is different because, as you can imagine, each facility is slightly different. They have different electrical outlets. They have different this and different that. So basically each one has got to be configured or engineered to order. And so it does make a big difference how you do that. And there is certain software you can use that help. And there's ways of looking at it from a process point of view. Because even though every like a drone manufacturer that I worked with as well, every drone was like engineered to order. However, they do have categories of drones that, although you could put finishing touches on them later, the base model is sort of the same. So if you think about it, I also worked with like a lighting manufacturer, and that's a good way to think about this. So like outdoor lighting, you may have a model that's like, you know, I don't know, like the model that looks the same, and then you just have like black, you have different colors, maybe different like metal types or something. But generally speaking, you have like the 320 model and the 650 model, or, you know, they may come up with fancy names for them. But you have models or groups of products. And that's kind of the key, is how do we get to groups of things so that you can, you know, configure on the fly without, if you can imagine, if you're literally configuring an order for a customer and then your whole supply chain changes, and you don't know how to change all those things that you just configured, because they could have like hundreds of configurations. Like even a window, I used to work with I worked with window clients that produce windows. You'd be surprised. There's like a million sizes. Do you want a strip of this type or that type? How thick is it? What color is it? What material is it? It's endless, the questions that can come up with windows. So if you had to literally go back and do every single configuration over again, like you may as well just hang up your hat and go home. You're never going to get it done. So you're absolutely right. Whoever brought that up before is that there's software, there's processes that support those more complex industries. And on the other side of things, the industries that look simple still require some level of personalization or configuration, or it could just be shipping timing. Because like we all do that with Amazon. We want it, well, we want this shipped like right away if it's available. And, you know, we want certain services that we get with products. If nothing else, we're at least personalizing that much of it. So it's really quite important these days. The idea to mass customize, basically, how do we produce a bunch of custom items quickly and to the customer's needs? And there's ways to do that. So that some of these are the And this kind of extends too from like what I'm calling the Amazon effect. So everyone wants everything like tomorrow or today, even if that's possible. They want easy returns. They want like 24/7 visibility to where their product is, which is a whole big problem if your ship is waiting at the ports and no, like all these players don't coordinate together today. I mean, the truckers aren't working for the same people as the container ships, aren't working for the same people as the ports, who aren't even the same people as the people who operate the ports, who aren't the same people who are in a terminal, who aren't the same people who are in the manufacturer. So like all these people are different and they don't have any interest in, well, I don't know how to say it, but basically they have their own profit objectives, their own customer objectives, and they're not necessarily willing to give up money and time to help a different supply chain partner unless it was created into a sort of a win-win for the whole supply chain. And that's another issue here. So anyway, that's what's happening in this customer personalization configuration area. And really, some of the issues here is to know that e-commerce is on the rise. Like, for example, I forgot to mention this, is that pre-pandemic, they were doing 55 million parcels per day. And they had predicted that by 2026, we'd be doing 100 million parcels per day. So basically doubling. But now FedEx has just predicted that we will be at 100 to 110 million parcels per day by 2022, not 2026. So as you can imagine, that has certainly shifted things as well, because it's created this issue of like delivering per one person in one house versus to lots of a pallet worth of product to a distribution center that then goes from there. It's a very different equation. So there's a lot of change in transportation as well, because if you can imagine it, we already have a lot of people on the roads. Perhaps this is why we seem to have even more people on the roads when half the people are working from home. It's because they have like, 5 drivers for every person driving around to deliver products instead of one truck going to one location. So it's highly problematic. So anyway, this is the first key area. And then let's see here. The next is the reshoring, nearshoring, reconfiguration. So in this realm, let's see. Yeah, actually, someone just brought up the last mile. So I'll mention that and then we'll go on, because I do want to make sure we get through them all. But basically, in this world of e-commerce, the last mile is highly important. And what that means is the last mile before it arrives on your doorstep is highly problematic, because they just use that term, but it's going to come from a distribution center, hopefully a regional one or a local one. But it's most likely not going to be in your town. It's like those big ones you see on the freeway. That could be, somewhere. It's going to be somewhere, hopefully in the same region. But so then the last mile, which is like from that distribution center, like, or I should say, when it comes to packaging, to package shipping, they might ship it from the distribution center. It might just be coming from the airport onto a FedEx or UPS truck. And but even at the airport, they have big facilities that wouldn't be called maybe a fulfillment center, which really is the same thing. All the packages have to go to one place, and then we have to figure out how to get it going onto a truck to people's house. So whether it's from a traditional distribution center or a distribution center located close to the airport, where it flew in on a plane recently. Either way, it's going to go through something like that, and then it's going to get on a truck, and then it's going to deliver to lots and lots of houses. So that's called the last mile. And that last mile is highly costly because, of course, it wasn't driving that last mile. We would get in a car and go somewhere, like if it was a consumer product, we would go to the grocery store or we would go to a mall or somewhere. And so we were going when we needed it, and we would get things, in bulk, because we wouldn't go to the store like literally every 5 minutes. But now, because it can be delivered to our house, it's kind of this, it's in reverse. So now we have all these other people delivering packages. So anyway, that's what the last mile is about. Now, reshoring, nearshoring, and reconfiguration. As I was saying, lots of clients are at least evaluating, how do I bring things back from like China, Vietnam, etc., to closer to where my customers are. So if you're a global company, you may just bring, you may have multiple, multiple manufacturing locations. If you're a global company, it makes sense these days, because why would you want to have it like flying everywhere and in boats everywhere stuck? So you'd want to put your manufacturing locations close to your customers. But generally speaking, because there are so many customers in the US, and this is true for Europe too. So Europe is also reshoring, and that could be reshoring to Europe itself or to surrounding areas that are lower cost to produce in. Like in the US's case, it could be Mexico. You might think, well, we should reshore everything to Mexico. Well, no, not necessarily, because how do you know? Like, what's your biggest cost? Is it transportation? Now you're going to be stuck at the border. There's all sorts of problems that go on in Mexico as well. How much less expensive is the labor? Does it matter? Because how does that relate to the transportation costs or the warehouse costs? So basically, there's a significant cost to work on with that, to look at how you reshore. So basically they are looking though at how do I resupply and reconfigure my supply chain. They're also looking at 3D printing and additive manufacturing. So that is, how do I produce something on the fly when it's needed, which is of course not as easy as it sounds, but it is happening, where you produce an item in a, you can just produce it from a 3D printing machine. And so that's another way to produce close to the customer. So these are types of, I have a client right now that's reshoring 100%, well, at least 80% of what they currently have. They were ahead of the game. So they went from China to Vietnam before everybody was going to Vietnam. And now they're going from Vietnam, and they have a location in Mexico. So that's why they're going there. But they to Mexico, and 80% of it's going to be reshored. So it's closer to the customers. Now, from a sales and operations planning point of view, this is an eye chart, but what suffice it to know, like I have information on the bottom of the slide here. For more information, go to this website, because it has been extremely successful in realigning your individual supply chain. So how do you get back aligned so you're not experiencing constant disruptions, changes to schedules, like it's a never-ending saga going on. So instead of that, how do we figure out what we're going to sell in advance? Which is, it depends on the type of business you're in. Like I said, if you're configure to order, engineer to order, it requires a whole different mindset. But basically, no matter your type of business, this, and we've been working with clients, and we can find out what kind of long lead time items they have to purchase, what manufacturing capacity they need to set up, which means how many types of people, what kinds of machines and equipment. Do I need to purchase additional, like tooling, maybe? What kinds of people should I hire? Who should I cross-train? Those kinds of questions, so that they are prepared. And they, of course, it's never that simple. They have to then get corporate approval or board approval or something. But basically, how do I figure all that out in enough detail to know what's going to happen so I can make directionally correct decisions? And so that is really the key, because, like, for example, we worked with one client that did have an engineer to order type business. They had volume increases of like 50% and higher, which is significant. And they were able to supply their customers with what they needed at in the high 90s in terms of their service, the percentage of on-time delivery to what they committed to their customers. And that allowed them to grow their business even further. And so the reason they could do that is that this type of a process allowed them to get ahead of the needs and prepare and be resilient to changing conditions. So I would definitely recommend thinking about doing this type of thing because it helps you with service, lead times. Actually, you can reduce costs because like I worked with another client that was an aerospace client where we were doing it, this process to help them improve their on-time delivery to their customers. But as a side benefit, we ended up knowing what we were going to need from suppliers in advance, even though they're in an industry where they supposedly have contracts out multiple years. Like it wasn't set up that way in the company. So we were able to get an advanced picture of what was needed that allowed their suppliers to get more in alignment. And so we actually got reduced costs to suppliers without hurting the suppliers. And so we gained 5% in margins. So that, and then inventory. Everybody's worried about having too much inventory today because, as they probably should be, because like this pandemic has created going from just in time to just in case in a way. Although it never was really, that's a whole nother thing, which we don't have time to get into. But generally speaking, folks are concerned about inventory because inventory ties up cash unnecessarily. So that's something that we should be thinking about. So this type of a process helps us manage this. All right, and then I guess we will see here. I'm gonna keep speeding along. So that, and then like Jaime said, we'll have this available on the website as well so that you can dig into more detail. So be thinking on the talent side, just to look at follow people, not companies. So you have to be thinking about how you can't just hire talent away from other people anymore. You have to be attracting talent, which is different. And you have to be able to keep good talent, which is a whole nother story. So be thinking about, you have to think about it in a whole new manner, whole new way. And I have several articles on my website on this topic if you'd like to learn more, because I think Jaime, you want to wrap up, right? You're on mute, I think, but
Yes, Lisa. Yes, if we can start wrapping it up, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem at all. That's great. Earlier I was thinking that we had till 12:30, but that's good. I'm happy to do that. So just be rethinking your talent strategy. As I said, you now have to look for people who every single client in 16 years of consulting has someone who has been overlooked by leadership that has a lot more skills and knowledge than they realize. So look in your organizations with a whole new light and make sure you do something to keep good people. So there's a lot of things I could suggest, but keep good people, offer training. It's more than that though. You know, you have to have good leaders, mentoring programs, and there's a lot of things we could talk about here, but basically there's plenty of articles on my website. That is true for digitizing and translating data into insights, because I've mentioned several things here. So the good news is I don't have to go into it in a lot of detail, but start with a modern ERP system. If you don't have one, you need to look for one. And it's most likely time, because the older ERP systems don't support what's needed to thrive and to be resilient in today's changing times. And so one of the projects I do for clients is help them select new ERP systems. It's less about the system than it is about understanding your business processes and what you need to grow your business or to be profitable. So just understand, and please keep in mind that every ERP salesman is a shark. That doesn't mean they can't be friendly or nice, but they are sharks. So you have to be really careful. And really, the best thing is to look at your business processes, understand what you need to support your growth, what's different or unique to your industry and your business, and then which partner are you working with? Because it's all about, like everything else, you could find the best system ever, but if you don't have a good partner, you are going to be in the same place you are today, just much poorer. So look at upgrading your ERP systems. Also look at some of the added technologies that are available today. Don't go crazy because you won't get any of it done successfully, but figure out what's appropriate again to your customers, to serving your customers in a profitable way and in a timely way. There's always different softwares required for different companies that will help achieve their goals. So the key is to figure out, not just jump on this bandwagon without thinking through it, and don't get into analysis paralysis about the topic, but take a quick look, do an assessment, and then you are going to have to take a leap and move forward, because otherwise you will be left in the dust. There's just no way to go around it. We cannot do things manually anymore like we used to. And then the last thing I'd say with this slide is data. Every single client, even those that don't have an ERP system, has a mountain of data. If you think about what you find even before 9 a.m. in the morning, like if you drive somewhere, you see something on billboards, you hear things in the news, you get alerts on your phone, there's like a mountain of data. So the key is, how do you get something out of your systems that will give you quick information that's directionally correct, so that you can make decisions where you will, like, you sometimes have to spend significant money and you can't go backwards. So you have to like just get to the point where you can get some quick information to make decisions in a directionally correct manner, and you keep proceeding forward and revising and as you go. So that relates to the SIOP process I was talking about earlier as well, the sales and operations planning process. But be looking at this, and then predictive analytics relates to data too. First, you have to get the right data out, make good decisions with it directionally correct. Then you can go to the point where you say, wow, what is my data telling me? What, instead of just like maintaining my car or maintaining my machine, it'll predict for you what's going to be a problem, so you can fix just those things before they break. That's even better. But you can't run before you've started. You have to crawl, walk, and then run. So that's digitization and translating data into insights. As I probably mentioned, but I'll just repeat it here. Everyone's wanting to know, when will this get better? Well, at a global level, there is no time frame. The good news though is, at a company level, at an individual level, we can take control over our supply chain with the strategies I just mentioned. And I've seen clients doing it successfully. Those clients that are taking control over their supply chain and following the strategies I just outlined are growing at a much faster rate than their competition. So that's what you're going to do, is if you can take control over your situation, that's much more achievable than taking control over the world. Then you will satisfy your customers and you'll be profitable. And so your customers, when they run into issues, are going to increase volumes with you and decrease volumes with your competitors. I see this as the biggest opportunity that's happened since the Great Depression, where more companies will be successful emerging from this period of time, similar to the Great Depression. And the rest will go by the wayside. They'll either go out of business, they'll be absorbed, they will retire because they're a family-owned business, and that'll be that. So take control over your supply chain. And then here's a free resource for you. Like a lot of these pieces I put together from trusted advisors and experts, and gave some strategies. So feel free to download an ebook. And this, if you do that, you'll also get to my website. I have many newsletters that are all free, and speeches and those kinds of things. And you can access those kinds of resources and, be on your way to making a more resilient supply chain. So Jaime, do you have any other questions or anything else you'd like to do before we wrap up here?
Lisa, thank you so much. Very informative. Again, we're going to have this presentation. It's been recorded. It's going to be on our website. I shared that with everyone on the chat. And once again, Lisa, thank you for your time. You're not only your knowledge, but your wisdom. You're definitely an expert in this, and Riverside County appreciates it. And of course, those that participated today. I
Very
just
good.
want to remind everybody that this is an international business academy, started today. Our next one is coming up on May 25th. And we're going to have the topic on May 25th is foreign trade zones. And we're going to have an expert on foreign trade zones, which is Mr. David R. Harlow. And Mr. Harlow is president of ITC Diligence. ITC was founded back in 2002 as a licensed customs broker and international trade consultant with expertise in foreign trade zones. He currently represents that company, ITC, at the Riverside County, Port of Long Beach, Port of Jacksonville, and Las Vegas, as well as many other businesses across the nation with supply chain solutions and other federal programs. He's a native of this area, received his U.S. Customs brokerage in 2002, spent the last 25 years specializing in textile industry, footwear, and foreign trade zone industry. He began his career with Frisk Companies and Norman Krieger. Mr. Harlow spends his free time participating on foreign trade zones and various other organizations with leadership roles, but most importantly with his wife, Dawn, and 3 children, Andrew and Emma. Very important family. So we look forward to everyone participating on the next part of the academy. And remember, if you complete all these 3 sessions, we will provide you with a certificate of completion. Again, Lisa, we can't thank you enough. And everyone, thank you for your participation. And you guys have a great day. And we'll see you at the next one.